In the Australian Special Air Service Regiment, earning the sand-coloured beret is considered one of the most brutal military achievements on Earth. But here is the part most people never hear about. That beret can be taken back at any time, on any day, without a single piece of paperwork being filed. Inside the walls of Campbell Barracks in Swanbourne, Western Australia, a system exists where your own teammates hold the power to end your career with a quiet word to the right person. No tribunal, no written warning, no appeal. One conversation and you are packing your kit before the sun goes down. This is not a broken system, it is the system, and it has been since the regiment was born. But what drove Australia to build a unit this unforgiving? And what happens when the culture that is supposed to keep men accountable is pushed to its absolute limit? The story begins not in Australia, but in the jungles of Malaya. In the early 1950s, the British Special Air Service was reactivated to fight communist insurgents in the dense terrain of the Malayan Peninsula. The conflict, known as the Malayan Emergency, was not a conventional war. There were no front lines, no massed enemy formations to engage. The communist guerrillas lived among the local population and disappeared into jungle so thick that a man could walk within 5 meters of an enemy patrol and never see them. The British quickly learned that large infantry operations were useless in this environment. What worked was small, highly trained patrols that could move silently through the jungle for weeks at a time, gathering intelligence, setting ambushes, and surviving on minimal resupply. The SAS was rebuilt around this concept. Patrols of 4 men operated deep in enemy territory with no reinforcements within reach. Every man had to be a navigator, a medic, a signaler, and a fighter. There was no room for passengers. If one man failed, the entire patrol was compromised. It was in this crucible that the SAS forged its culture of absolute internal accountability. A trooper who could not keep pace, who made noise on patrol, who failed to maintain his weapon, or who showed poor judgment under stress was removed without ceremony. There were no second chances. The jungle killed men who repeated mistakes, and the regiment removed them before the jungle got the chance. The Australians took notice. In 1957, the Australian government formally raised the first Special Air Service company at Campbell Barracks, Swanbourne, a quiet suburb on the western coast of Perth. The location was chosen deliberately, tucked away from the main army bases, isolated enough to build something different. The founding cadre included veterans of the Korean War and soldiers who had trained alongside British SAS troopers in Malaya. Several had seen firsthand how the British dealt with underperformers. They had watched men who survived the grueling selection course vanish from the squadron overnight after a single failed patrol. No farewells, no explanations. The empty bed said everything. They understood that the SAS model was not about punishment. It was about keeping the rest of the team alive. From the very beginning, the Australians adopted the British model wholesale, not just the tactics and the patrol structures, but the culture of relentless internal accountability. The motto was borrowed directly: who dares wins. But the unwritten rule underneath it was just as important. Who fails to perform, leaves. The first commanding officers of the Australian SAS understood something that most conventional military leaders resisted. A unit that operates in 4-man patrols deep in hostile territory cannot afford the luxury of second chances. In a conventional battalion, a weak soldier might be carried by the structure around him, absorbed into a platoon of 30 where his shortcomings are diluted by the competence of those around him. In the SAS, there is no crowd to hide in. Every man in the patrol is a load-bearing wall. Remove one and the structure holds. Leave a weak one in place and the whole thing collapses under pressure. A navigator who misreads a map by 100 meters can walk his patrol into an ambush. A signaler who fumbles a radio call can leave his team without extraction. A soldier who hesitates at the wrong moment can get everyone killed. The consequences of individual failure are not abstract. They are measured in body bags. This principle was embedded into the regiment from its earliest days. When the unit was expanded and redesignated as the Special Air Service Regiment in 1964, the internal culture of immediate accountability came with it. Senior non-commissioned officers, the troop sergeants, and squadron sergeant majors held informal but absolute authority over who stayed and who went. If a soldier could not keep pace on patrol, if his navigation was unreliable, if his shooting slipped below the standard, or if his judgment under stress showed cracks, the recommendation was simple. Return to unit, RTU. Two words that carry the weight of a career ending. In the broader Australian Defence Force, removing a soldier from a unit is a slow process. There are counselling sessions, show cause notices, review boards, and layers of paperwork governed by the Defence Force Discipline Act. The SAS regiment operates nothing like that. It holds a degree of internal autonomy that most soldiers in the regular army would find hard to believe. The authority to remove an operator sits within the unit's own chain of command. The squadron sergeant major, a position held by the most experienced and respected soldier in the squadron, acts as the final filter. His word, backed by the observations of peers and troop leaders, is effectively the verdict. There is no jury. The squadron commander provides formal sign-off, but in practice, the sergeant major's assessment is rarely questioned. The reasoning is straightforward. The people best qualified to judge whether a man belongs in the regiment are the people who train beside him, fight beside him, and trust him with their lives. This system has shaped every generation of SASR operators. During the Borneo confrontation in the mid-1960s, Australian SAS patrols operated along the Indonesian border in some of the most demanding jungle terrain on the planet. The confrontation was a shadow war. Indonesia's President Sukarno opposed the formation of Malaysia, and Indonesian forces launched cross-border raids into Sabah and Sarawak. The Australian SAS was sent to patrol the border, a wall of dense primary jungle stretching hundreds of kilometers. There were no roads, no clearings, and in many places visibility dropped to just a few meters. Patrols lasted weeks. Resupply was rare, often limited to what a man could carry on his back. Contact with the enemy could happen at any moment, and when it did, the patrol was entirely on its own. Extraction by helicopter was often impossible under the thick canopy. In these conditions, there was no tolerance for a man who could not carry his weight, literally or figuratively. A soldier who struggled to navigate, who made noise moving through the undergrowth, or who could not maintain his composure during a sudden contact was not given a second chance to learn on the job. The cost of that education was too high. His patrol commander would speak to the troop sergeant, and within days the man would be on a transport back to his battalion. No discussion, no debate. The same culture carried through to Vietnam, where SASR patrols earned a fearsome reputation among North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces. The regiment deployed to South Vietnam in 1966, operating primarily from Nui Dat in Phuoc Tuy Province. Australian SAS teams conducted long-range reconnaissance patrols that pushed deep into enemy-held territory, sometimes operating for days within earshot of large Viet Cong formations. Their mission was intelligence gathering, but they also conducted ambushes with devastating effectiveness. A typical SASR patrol in Vietnam consisted of 5 men, one more than the British 4-man model, adapted to the demands of operating in dense jungle where an extra pair of eyes and an extra weapon could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. They moved lightly armed, but carrying enough ammunition and rations for up to a week. They communicated with hand signals and slept in shallow harbors scraped into the jungle floor. The Viet Cong came to call them Ma Rung, the phantoms of the jungle, a nickname earned by the regiment's ability to appear, strike, and vanish without a trace. It was a mark of fear, and the Australians wore it with quiet pride. The regiment suffered remarkably few casualties compared to the damage it inflicted. Veterans credit this directly to the uncompromising standards applied to every man in every patrol. If you were not up to the job, you were gone before you could become a liability. The lessons of Borneo were confirmed in the rice paddies and rubber plantations of Phuoc Tuy. The RTU system was not cruelty, it was insurance. In the decades that followed Vietnam, the regiment continued to evolve. New skills were added, counter-terrorism capabilities were developed. The Cold War brought new threats and new training demands. But through every change, the core culture remained untouched. The standard was the standard, and it was tested again under the eyes of the world in East Timor. In September 1999, Australian-led forces deployed to East Timor as part of the International Force for East Timor, known as INTERFET. The SASR was among the first units on the ground, inserted ahead of the main force to conduct reconnaissance and secure key positions. The situation was dangerous and unpredictable. Pro-Indonesian militia groups were conducting widespread violence against the civilian population, and the threat of direct confrontation with Indonesian military elements was real. SASR patrols operated in small teams across difficult terrain, often with limited communication and no guarantee of rapid reinforcement. The stakes were as high as anything the regiment had faced since Vietnam. Once again, the internal culture of accountability proved its value. Each operator understood that the eyes of his teammates were on him at all times, not out of suspicion, but out of necessity. In a situation where a single mistake could trigger an international incident or cost lives, the regiment's refusal to tolerate anything less than total competence was not harsh. It was the price of operating at the edge. The training pipeline that feeds the regiment is designed to mirror this philosophy. The SASR selection course is widely regarded as one of the most grueling military assessments in the world. Conducted primarily in the rugged bushland and mountain terrain of Western Australia, the course runs for approximately 3 weeks of pure physical and psychological punishment. Candidates carry heavy packs across brutal distances, navigate featureless terrain with minimal sleep, and are subjected to constant pressure from directing staff whose job is to find every weakness. The course is not simply a test of fitness, it is designed to strip away every psychological defense and reveal the person underneath. Candidates are pushed to the point where their bodies are screaming at them to stop, and then they are pushed further. The directing staff watch for the moment when a man's willpower fails, when he begins to cut corners on his navigation, when he starts relying on the man in front of him instead of trusting his own compass. They watch for the man who gives up inside his head 10 kilometers before his legs stop moving. The pass rate hovers around 10 to 15% in most cycles. Some years it drops into single digits. Entire courses have finished with fewer than a handful of successful candidates from starting pools of over 100. But here is what most outsiders fail to understand. Passing selection does not earn you a permanent place in the regiment. It earns you the right to begin the reinforcement cycle, months of additional specialist training in areas like close quarter battle, demolitions, signaling, patrol medicine, and free fall parachuting. And throughout every stage of that training, you can still be removed. The RTU threat does not expire after selection. It follows you for the entirety of your time in the regiment. Inside the regiment's close quarter battle facility, the standard is made real in the most raw and physical way possible. Operators train with live ammunition in confined spaces, clearing rooms and engaging targets at distances measured in meters. The smell of gunpowder hangs in the air. Spent brass litters the concrete floor. The walls are pocked with the scars of thousands of rounds fired in anger and in practice. Role players, sometimes fellow operators, stand in as hostages during exercises, positioned inches from where rounds will impact. The precision required is extraordinary. A shot that drifts even slightly off target does not just fail a drill. It represents a fracture in the trust that holds the team together. Every round is observed. Every movement is assessed. Instructors and peers track performance with the kind of attention that leaves no room for a bad day. The regiment's internal culture demands consistency, not occasional brilliance. An operator who shoots perfectly 99 times out of 100 but falters on the 100th is a man who might get someone killed. And in the close quarter battle facility, the consequences of that 100th failure are standing right there in the room, wearing the same uniform, trusting their teammate not to miss. The demands on an SASR operator do not ease with experience or rank. A senior soldier in his late 30s is held to the same standard as a newly badged trooper 10 years younger. Age is not an excuse. Rank is not a shield. The regiment's history holds plenty of examples of experienced men, operators with multiple combat deployments, and years of distinguished service being moved on because their bodies or their skills could no longer keep pace. What makes this system work is the culture that surrounds it. In most Army units, raising concerns about a colleague's performance is seen as disloyalty. In the SAS, the opposite is true. Failing to speak up about a teammate's decline is the betrayal. If a man's shooting is slipping, if his fitness is fading, if his judgment under pressure is becoming unreliable, his teammates are expected to raise it with the troop sergeant or sergeant major. The conversation is rarely dramatic. It might happen after a training exercise, a quiet word in the corridor, a mention during a debrief, but the weight of that conversation is enormous. Once the concern is raised and validated, the process moves quickly. It is a system that respects what a man has done, but cares only about what he can do right now. For the operator who is removed, the experience is isolating. One day, he is part of one of the most exclusive military units in the world, trusted with the nation's most sensitive operations. The next, he is packing his Bergen and preparing to return to a conventional unit where most soldiers will never understand where he has been or what he has lost. Much of his service in the regiment will not appear in his official records. The operations he participated in, many of them classified, are erased from his documented career. He carries the experience but cannot speak of it. He may have spent years training to a level that only a handful of soldiers in the country will ever reach, and now he is expected to return to a world where that training counts for nothing on paper. The sense of loss is profound, both professional and deeply personal. Some men struggle with the transition for years. Others channel it into new careers. But none of them forget what it felt like to belong to the regiment and then to have that belonging taken away. The system is designed to be painful. That is the point. If losing your place did not hurt, the threat of losing it would mean nothing. The events that followed the Afghanistan deployments brought the SASR's culture of accountability into the harshest spotlight it has ever faced. In November 2020, the Inspector General of the Australian Defence Force released the findings of a years-long inquiry led by Major General Paul Brereton. The inquiry had been initiated in 2016, triggered by rumours and reports that had circulated within the special operations community for years. What Brereton's team uncovered was far worse than most had expected. The report, known widely as the Brereton Report, found credible information that 25 current or former SASR personnel were involved in the unlawful killing of 39 Afghan civilians and prisoners. The killings were not the result of battlefield confusion or split-second decisions under fire. The report described a pattern of deliberate, unlawful conduct that had been concealed and in some cases encouraged within certain elements of the regiment. The findings sent shockwaves through the Australian military and the public. For the families of the 39 Afghans killed, no amount of institutional reform could undo what had been done. Chief of the Defence Force, General Angus Campbell, described the findings as deeply disturbing and took the extraordinary step of stripping the meritorious unit citation from the Special Operations Task Group. In a move that stunned the regiment, 2 Squadron was formally disbanded as a direct consequence of the inquiry's findings. The decision to disband an entire squadron to erase its numerical designation from the regiment's order of battle had never happened before in the SASR's history. The Brereton Report exposed a painful truth. The very culture of secrecy and internal authority that made the SASR effective had, in certain pockets, been twisted into something toxic. In some cases, the peer pressure that was supposed to uphold standards had instead been used to enforce silence about misconduct. Junior soldiers described being pressured into acts they knew were wrong, caught in a hierarchy where speaking up felt impossible. The same system that empowered teammates to flag a slipping shooter had, in the worst cases, been weaponized to protect those who should have been held accountable. The report forced the Australian Defence Force to confront the fact that a system built on trust and autonomy requires not just the power to remove underperformers, but the moral courage to hold everyone, including the most senior and decorated operators, to the same ethical standard. In the years since the Brereton Report, the SASR has undergone a significant restructuring. New oversight mechanisms have been introduced, including external review processes that did not exist before. The Office of the Special Investigator was established in January 2021 to pursue criminal accountability for the alleged offences. Cultural reform programs were implemented across Special Operations Command, with a particular focus on ethical decision-making, leadership accountability, and the protection of those who report misconduct. But at its core, the regiment's internal system of peer-driven accountability has not been dismantled. If anything, it has been reinforced with a sharper edge. The lesson drawn by the regiment's current leadership is not that the system was wrong, but that it had been applied selectively. The standard must be total. It must apply to conduct as much as competence, to ethics as much as marksmanship. An operator who fails a moral test is as dangerous to the team as one who fails a shooting drill. Today, the Australian SAS Regiment remains one of the most respected and feared special operations units in the world. Its operators have served with distinction alongside American, British, and Allied forces in theaters from East Timor to Iraq to Afghanistan. The regiment's reputation for quiet professionalism endures. But beneath that reputation sits a system that is as brutal as it is necessary. Every operator who wears the regiment's sandy beret knows that it can be taken from him at any moment. There are no lifetime memberships, no untouchable veterans, no amount of past glory that can substitute for present performance. The only currency that matters inside Campbell Barracks is the trust of the men beside you, and that trust must be earned again every single day. The question that SASR forces us to ask is uncomfortable but important. What would our workplaces, our institutions, our teams look like if every member operated under the knowledge that their place was never guaranteed? That past achievements offered no shelter from present accountability. It is a standard that most organizations would never dare to impose. But for the men who operate in the shadows, where the margin between success and catastrophe is measured in fractions of a second, it is the only standard that makes sense. The hardest thing about joining the Australian SAS is not surviving selection. It is proving every morning that you still deserve to be there. What do you think? Could this kind of accountability work beyond the military? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.